and Communications Manager at Cornerstone Counselling. This is our last collaborative webinar of 2023, and in the spirit of the holiday season, I just want to thank everyone for joining us throughout the year to learn about mental wellness. And I would also like to extend my thanks to both Michelle and Alex for being amazing partners and very engaging presenters. And we encourage you to stay tuned until the end of today's presentation to hear about our plans for 2024. For today, we will be recording the session, but we are not going to be keeping the chat. And we will also send, a follow-up email after the session with a few resources. Today, we will be discussing therapy, and this webinar is intended as educational information rather than a replacement for medical advice or training. We will be offering general advice to help you understand therapy, but some of these suggestions might apply to you or people in your life. So just remember, keep that in mind as you're listening to the presenters. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that the land on which we live, work, and prosper is Treaty 6 territory, the ancestral and traditional meeting grounds and gathering place for the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, and Nakota Sioux. We acknowledge the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for generations, and we are grateful for the traditional knowledge keepers and elders. We recognize the land as an act of reconciliation and gratitude to those whose territory we reside and gather on today. I'd like to introduce our first presenter, who is Alex, and she is a registered provisional psychologist at Cornerstone Counselling, who works with adults, couples, and families. These clients may be struggling with various issues, including anxiety, depression, and trauma. One of the things she loves most about counseling is the privilege that comes through sitting with courageous individuals every day. If you are interested in pursuing counseling, please visit our website, which is www.cornerstonecounseling.com. Our second presenter today is Michelle Devlin, the owner of Creating People Power. She is a certified CMHA psychological health and safety advisor and DISC certified. Michelle is an accomplished facilitator, passionate about fostering respectful workplaces and helping business professionals become better leaders. If you are interested in working with Michelle, please visit her website, which is www.creatingpeoplepower.ca. And with that, I will let Alex and Michelle take it away.
Thanks, Amanda, and thank you everyone for joining us today. As I mentioned, we're going to be using Menti. So I've clicked on a link in the chat that will allow you to log directly into Menti, or you can just grab your phone and scan the QR code. If it's easier for you to open another browser, you can do that as well, and then just enter the little code 1744-9510, and it will get you into Menti, where you can provide completely anonymous responses to the questions. So this is part of the reason that we like to use Menti, is it gives people an opportunity to respond and just keep sort of their thoughts to themselves. So while people log in, Alex, why don't we start with the first question?
Yeah,
Stigmas.
our first question today is, what are your opinions about some of the stigmas associated with therapy? I think when we even just, say the word therapy, seeing a therapist, mental health, lots of things come to mind for folks. Some positive things, some not so positive things, and everything in between. So I think we wanted to give a space to see what people's opinions are, what comes to mind, just to sort of share the breadth of different responses that people have and the different stigmas that are out there.
Yeah, and I guess I'm curious about what you hear as a therapist. If people share these thoughts with you, maybe you can give us sort of a broader perspective than just the people that have logged in. And if you want to put your answers in the chat too, you can feel free to do that, everyone.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because I'm surprised to hear like awkward, stressful. Those aren't things I would associate with therapy, actually.
And I wonder, me neither, but I wonder if we've had different experiences in therapy or with people around us that have shared positive experiences in therapy. But I will say, probably most people that come in are feeling a bit timid, nervous, awkward. Yeah, nervous
Mm,
would probably actually be the word that I hear the most when I kind of ask people, how are you doing coming into your first session? I think most of us just don't know what to expect. I think that even though we see a lot of campaigns, a lot more conversation on social media and through these discussions about
mhm,
mental health and therapy,
mhm,
um, we still don't know like the inner workings of what happens behind the scenes. And that just creates a lot of unknown, which is scary. So that's kind
mhm.
of my experience. What about on your end, Michelle?
I think nervous is a really great word. But for me, and maybe it's because I've experienced therapy, I would have said things like comforting, safe
Mm-hmm.
space. So, so that leads me to believe that, you're right, based on your lived experience, you may have different responses. And what I hope we are able to do is get rid of some of the stigma. I guess, comforting is not a stigma. Um, and maybe that's just even the way we phrase the question is the reason that some of these responses come up. So I think let's address that right now. Um, Stigmas around therapy. I definitely agree with this first question. Is it big enough? The very first time I worked with a therapist, I remembered thinking, is this therapy worthy? Like maybe this is just something I should talk
Mm-hmm.
with my friend about. I didn't want to, quote, waste the therapist's time with what in my head, were pretty trivial problems. So I don't know
Mm-hmm.
if other people think that, but that first question resonates with me for sure.
Oh my goodness. I'm so glad that you brought that up and even brought in the word worthiness. I can't tell you the amount of times I have had people apologize for what they're sharing
Mm,
or, yeah, apologize for taking that
mm,
hour as if it like is an inconvenience to share. And I really tell people there is no problem too big or too small. Um, y- Most often, if someone has booked that therapy appointment, there's a reason. Maybe they themselves don't even understand what the
mhm,
reason is or what's going
mhm,
on within themselves,
mhm,
but you booked that for a reason.
mhm.
And so there's something there. So no need to apologize or worry. We're here for you in whatever time of need it is.
I think that is important, and maybe even something that agencies could market, right? The fact that I
Mhm.
know for myself, when I would reach out, it was always like when I was in crisis. I needed someone right
Mhm.
now. And you start to realize that therapy isn't just for crisis, it's actually for maintaining mental health. And that's something that
Totally.
took me a long time to learn.
And I remember when we were kind of discussing the webinar, we came up with the, I guess, parallel or analogies of like different sort of medical departments or different medical specialists. Like you're saying, you
Mm,
are right. I think a lot of people think coming to therapy is I can only go if there's a crisis.
yeah,
I can only go if I've just been in an accident or lost
yeah,
somebody or something's happened. There's an emergency room with doctors that are there for crisis, but you also visit your family doctor when you have questions, even
yeah,
just for that maintenance once a year checkup.
yeah.
And dentists very similarly too. So I really like that sort of framework of looking at therapy that it can be all of those things and there's different ways to utilize it.
And the very last question, do I need to go every week? I think
Mm.
maybe that's another conversation that people can have about therapy, and we could address that in the webinar is, you know, just like your doctor, some years you might go once a year for your
Hmm.
regular checkup, and other times you're going more regularly, just based on what's going on with your physical health. And if we could maybe start to think of our mental health in the same way, if you don't have experience with that, to know that that's okay, right? It doesn't need
Hmm.
to be a regular every 3 weeks or every month. It can ebb and flow based on
Absolutely.
what's going on in your life, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm glad that you mentioned that.
And I just wanted to invite people that are logged into the webinar. I mean, I know we record it and people watch it later. So we don't save the chat, just as a reminder. But if you have questions, you can feel free to put them into the chat, or you can send them just directly to myself, Amanda, or Alex, and we will address them live throughout the webinar. I really just wanted to get a sense of like whether or not people have been to therapy or if they've never been to therapy. I'm not sure if people will feel comfortable answering. Oh, one person has felt comfortable, so that's wonderful. I think this is an interesting question. And maybe the next question even more, Alex. So I appreciate your honesty. We just kind of wanted to gauge people in the audience and see. So we have a handful that have been, which is interesting because you're here to crush the stigma around therapy. So I appreciate that. I think there is a role for each of us to play, especially if we've experienced it and talking about it. And whether we get answers on this question or not, Alex, I think this is an important conversation. I think some of us, at least I'm going to speak for myself. I cannot tell you how many times before going to therapy I would spend half hour, even up to an hour, researching agencies, looking for therapists, and then never booking, or booking and then canceling. Because I can't even tell you why. Nervous? I don't know.
Yeah,
Just,
nervous,
I think,
unsure.
I think that happens a lot. Amanda was sharing with us, isn't it up to 30% of people cancel appointments that they've booked?
Yeah, at the very least.
Wow. So do we know why this happens?
I think a little bit, yes. There has been conversation about it. One, as you were sharing, and we're just about to talk about it too, when you go to look for that therapist, you're reading lots of bios, maybe some people have some pictures or videos, or you've heard about somebody, but people are like, did I pick the right one? I'm not sure. And then they kind of back out. Maybe they have even found like another avenue to go down. So that could be a reason. Nerves, definitely a reason. And it is such a big hurdle. Even for someone like me who works in the mental health industry and has for many years, it's hard to go make that first step and actually get there. So I would say for people that have even like thought about booking appointments, booked an appointment and then canceled, like pat yourself on the back. That's a huge step to do in and of itself. And I know that you'll get there in time. But hopefully too in our conversation today, maybe some of what we share helps you find that right fit, helps dispel some of the nerves in that first session. But those are some of my reasons.
Yeah, and I think the reason that I canceled is I didn't spend enough time at this stage, Alex. So let's start with finding a good fit. Like, how do we do that? I know, one of the ways that I get information about other either professionals or agencies that I work with is I'll put it in my social media. Hey, does anybody know a great window washer? Does anybody know where I should buy a car? I have never seen anybody on my social media written, does anybody know a good therapist? And yet for something so personal, I feel like I should be asking my friends and getting referrals, right? Would that not be a great, yeah.
Totally. A really good avenue to go down.
Yeah. And even just a referral from a friend or like I know many people logging in will have employee family assistance programs. So that might be an option. Any other thoughts on where we can get referrals or ideas?
Yeah, I would definitely say, as you're noting, like recommendations from others would be like my number one.
Okay.
Another thing too, if you don't necessarily want to go, let's say it's your sister that's seeing a therapist, you might not want to see the same therapist as a family member.
That's
Even
fair.
seeing like, does my sister's therapist work in a private practice or an agency? Are there that can kind of help you even just look into one place instead of finding yourself on the web. That's probably my number one. And then there's a really great website that we can put into the chat called Psychology Today. This would probably be
Mm,
the most popular. It's beautifully made. You can filter it to your location in Edmonton and how many
mhm,
kilometers distance you're willing to drive, or if
mhm,
you want to be virtual, and it will pop up sort of all of the therapists in that area. And you can even filter based on their specialty, their gender. There's so many different filters for it. So that is also a really good starting point too. And I even believe it will share what insurance are covered, their fees. So it's very transparent in terms of the information that it can provide.
yeah, I've been on that site and it is a super, super easy search. So I really appreciate that you've mentioned psychology today. I think that is a good idea. I also think the second question about, before we even start looking for a therapist, really think about, what am I looking for? What do I want? Is it advice? Is it a listening ear? To really get a sense, and maybe you can even talk about sort of, I think we're going to get into that, but what sort of offerings
Hmm.
therapy can, what outcomes people can get from therapy, I guess would be the question.
Absolutely. I think to even um, the specialty that maybe you're looking for, the topics that you want to talk about, could
Mm,
to be accompanied by the type of person that the therapist is. So
mm,
asking yourself, what am I looking for in a therapist? Some good words to maybe ponder. Do you need someone that's very directive? Do you want someone that's a little more laid
mm,
back and gives that space? Therapists are oriented very differently. And so there's tons of different ways they might approach therapy. So thinking of some of those things. Do I want directive? Do I want a little more laid back? Do I want someone that's following a protocol? There are some therapies that are very like
mm.
protocol based. EMDR
Okay,
is one of them, or CBT. Do I
okay.
want someone that is just a listening ear and supportive? So, kind of taking those words into account might help you notice what you're looking for in people's bios. But there are also therapists that might specialize in, for instance, ADHD, grief
Mm,
and loss, trauma, addictions,
mm,
family therapy, couples therapy. So, some
okay.
of those keywords, too, if you just take some time to brainstorm what is the type of therapist I'm looking for and what specialties might I be looking for, putting that into Google and putting Edmonton at the end will also bring up a plethora of resources of people that are more tailored to what you're looking for.
Okay, I appreciate that. And I really like that you addressed um, their approach, because some people, if you've had a behavior assessment at work, you'll know what different styles are, how people take different approaches. And
Mhm.
that's great context for a therapist, right? I mean, I'm a pretty driven doer, get up and go person. So if I have someone who's really pensive and thoughtful, sometimes it requires me to be a little bit more patient. And I might want to have a therapist who either matches my style or, quite frankly, is complementary and allows me
Mhm.
to give that space. So I appreciate that. And Amanda has just put in the chat an example from Cornerstone Counselling
Nice.
of many of the websites like Cornerstone will have bios and pictures. I know for me, I do want to see a face.
Mhm.
It's very relationship based for me. So do you want to speak before we move on? Maybe I think availability sort of speaks
Mm.
for itself, but do you want to speak to the different options for intake, what that means if people don't understand the terminology intake and what that entails?
For sure. Depending on where you might go for therapy, if you come to an organization like Cornerstone, there's other agencies in town too. Our intake process is flexible to fitting the person that's coming to us. So, for instance, you are able to call us and we can do an intake, just kind of getting that really just your biographical information, your name, your birth date, kind of the presenting concerns, and we can give some recommendations too in terms of who might be a good fit for you. We
Mhm.
can do that over the phone, we can do that over email. There's just a variety of options for that intake to take place because I also know, oh no, I have to book an appointment and I have to talk to somebody on the phone. That can be a little bit intimidating too. So sometimes being able to book and do this whole process through email can also
Mm,
be
mhm.
allow for an ease into this transition of coming to therapy. Yeah. And
Yep.
the availability piece, I think most people will know maybe what that means, but therapists have very varying hours, evenings, weekends, mornings, afternoons. So there's someone out there that will fit your schedule for sure.
Yeah. And there are agencies as well. Some of them will even do an online intake, right? So there's different options
Absolutely.
available, and to just find a good fit. So I was going to do a little fun true or false question. There's different types of therapists and support. Full disclosure, this is leading us to another slide. So I'm just going to move into that about, maybe you can
Mhm.
speak to this slide, Alex, because I do think that when we talk about a therapist or a psychologist, or the difference between a social worker or even a psychiatrist, what are some of those distinctions, and how do I know what I need?
Yeah, I'm really glad that you had this image created, Michelle, because it even another piece of the puzzle that gets confusing for folks and might stop people in their tracks before even starting is all of the different designations that are out there. What do they even mean? So,
Mhm.
very quickly, we'll just kind of summarize. A lot of people might think that they're visiting with a psychiatrist when they come to our office. A psychiatrist and a doctor are different than psychologists in that doctors, of course, go to medical school, and they do have an overview of sort of mental health and are able to prescribe medication that fits with some people's symptoms. A psychiatrist is someone who has actually specialized in mental health following medical school. So they've probably taken, on top of the 4 years of medical school, I think it's another 4+ years to get that designation. So they are very specialized. Um, and then, of course, we'll go into sort of the registered psychologist designation. There is a registered psychologist and then a registered provisional psychologist. And essentially, what the two mean, as the image shows, is a provisional psychologist is someone who's just completed their master's degree and has to kind of go through an exam period. They have to also do certain number of hours in an
Mm,
internship to get the full designation of registered psychologist.
okay.
And a provisional is also supervised. So they're working
Okay.
in close contact with their agency and supervisor. And then there is also social workers. A registered social worker, I don't believe they're able to provide mental health, like a direct counseling, but people who are registered clinical social workers who have had master's degrees are able to do counseling.
Mm,
That doesn't mean that a registered social worker can't help you in the mental health domain. They may be able to provide more resources in terms of where you might look, different things that are available to you. And just help you actually within the system. And then the three sort of in the middle, the registered marriage and family therapist, the Canadian certified counselor, and the registered therapeutic counselor. These are
mhm,
all sort of counselor slash therapist designations. Um, most of them have taken a master's degree. The difference is they might not have had the background to be able to qualify as a psychologist. They still, for the most part, have extensive training in doing talk therapy and counseling.
mm,
So that would be maybe the difference. And one thing that I didn't note, a registered psychologist can often do assessments. So they might be able to give
mm.
you some pen and paper assessments in terms of
Okay.
figuring out what your diagnosis might be,
Okay.
whereas people who are counselors don't have that capacity.
Okay.
Hopefully, I
Good
didn't
to know.
lose anybody because I know there's a lot of info there.
Well, and I mean, we're happy to share this slide. I can't take any credit for it. This was Amanda who created this magic. So I want to give credit where credit is
Thank you,
due.
Amanda.
Yeah, I do think it is really helpful just in terms of understanding. So let's talk about setting yourself up for success, because this is an area when we were planning this webinar that I realized I didn't do this. When I first started seeking therapy, I don't think I set the time. And,
Mhm.
again, I think it was probably because I was at a point where I felt like I was in crisis. So at that point, it's really hard to regulate your thoughts, right? So
Totally.
understanding, I think we've already talked about the fact that every therapist is different is so important, and that it's okay if you have a couple sessions with someone. Or I know, like myself with my coaches in business, I work with someone for a few years and then I might step out because, my needs have changed.
Mhm.
Um, Taking notes is really in question, or really important, or bringing questions to the session. That can be super helpful if there's something that you want to talk about and stay focused on. Um, I loved this suggestion of having a fidget toy. Or, oh my gosh, bringing a friend. I never thought of doing that. Going with someone I feel comfortable with. So I just thought these were really great suggestions. And, even the time of day. Am I going in the morning when I'm really alert? Um, am I going to go in the afternoon and then head straight home? So just all of these little things. I don't know. And any other tips that you can provide in addition to what's on the slide? Maybe you can speak to understanding the ethics and what that means.
Yeah, understanding the ethics. Um, I guess where we were kind of going with this point was we as psychologists have a code of ethics that we need to follow. And so at the beginning, and I'll talk a little bit about this in a moment too, at the beginning of our time together, we're going to kind of go through a consent and confidentiality piece, and we're going to talk about sort of what, as psychologists, we are bound to. Lots of
Mm,
folks may come in feeling like we're going to be a friend, and it might feel like we do, I don't want to say have necessarily a friendship, but there is that warmth and we want to be supportive, but there are also boundaries around the relationship with, and that is the same as your therapist with your doctor, counselor, psychologist, social worker, whatever that designation is. There's
okay.
lots of different ethics involved in that. And so I know we put this in the slide of how to set yourself up for success. There's a variety of ethical codes online that you are welcome to look into if you're a very interested
Mm,
person. They are actually on the College of Alberta Psychologists website. But you can also be rest assured that we will take you through that at the beginning of the session just to make sure you're aware of everything that kind of goes on in therapy. You won't necessarily feel, we don't want you to feel blindsided in terms of what the relationship is going to look like.
that is that is really helpful. I love
I'm
the
glad.
fact that we can even look up that website. Okay,
Yeah.
so we're setting ourselves up for success. Now we're in the session. We've not canceled. We've booked. We've made it. We're either online, we're on the phone, or we're in person. Now what?
Now what? Yes. Whew. Your heart is probably pounding a little bit as you're stepping into the room, but you've sat down and you're starting to get to know the therapist. One of the things that goes back to what Michelle said about bringing in questions is maybe you have some questions that you want to start off the session with. Maybe you want to ask about, like, what is your expertise in this area? What is your tailored
Mm,
approach? How are you going to respond to XYZ? So I totally encourage people, you can be an advocate for yourself in those moments, just as you might prepare questions for your doctor or dentist, right? Don't be afraid of taking some of that lead there with questions. You can also think of it as a little bit of an interview with the therapist. Just because you've gone to that
mm,
first session doesn't mean they're your therapist for life. And I
right.
think that's really important to say. This is you're deciding too if this is right for you. So don't feel like you have to stick with that one person. And another point of this speak up approach, and I love that we have this in the bottom. Don't worry about hurting our feelings. We're trained to navigate things with you. If something's not working for you, I want to be the first to know about it. If I think that a certain approach might fit for you and you're really feeling like, ugh, I don't know about this, Alex. Let me know some of your hesitation. Let me know if it doesn't work. For example, I am someone who doesn't, I'm not someone who enjoys like meditation or mindfulness. And I see a psychologist, and a couple times in the beginning, she had encouraged me in session and outside of session to practice some stuff. And I started to not resent, but it felt like a chore to go and do a meditation activity. And so I told her, you know what? So and so, this just isn't a fit for me. I'm open to
Mm.
other resources, but I'm not sure about it. And she was so happy that I told her, and she was like, "Yeah, we won't try that one again. Let's do something different." I see you shaking your head there, Michelle.
Like it's almost bringing tears to my eyes because I did do something like that. And I remember it was a session when I was actually in my car. I was just in a parking lot and I thought that was a great spot. And it was exactly the same. It was an exercise where it was like, close your eyes, do this. And I just thought, like, I wanted to be open minded, but at the end of it, I was like, did nothing for me.
Mhm.
And in hindsight, I wish I would have said that. So I'm really happy that we're talking about it. And I think for me, pre-preparing some phrases so where I could go back next time and say, I
Yeah.
didn't enjoy that exercise, or that didn't resonate with me. Would we be,
Yeah.
and maybe like, even if I don't know why, to just be able to explain that. Um, so I just appreciate that we have this as a topic, because I think the point was raised when we were preparing for this. You're a paying customer, right? I mean, even if
Mhm.
your
Mhm.
employee family assistance program is paying for this, or if you're on sliding scale, and you've like, like Cornerstone is, where there's an opportunity, this is still about you,
Yeah.
and it's okay to acknowledge and take that time. I think that's really, really important.
Yeah, and just to jump off of what you said there, I know it can be really hard in session to say that too. So
Yes.
be
Yeah.
creative, as we were talking earlier. If it's more comfortable for you to send an email, depending on the email policy of that counselor agency. I've
Yes.
had people
Yes.
send an email because they just feel they can craft what they're saying better, they can get it out clearer,
Yeah.
or leave a voicemail. Do whatever is most comfortable for you. And I like that we're
Mhm.
moving to this slide now with some ideas of how to
Yeah.
speak up. You can steal these, you can write them down.
Yeah, I agree. And it's okay. I think part of the message we wanted to get through is it's okay to ask for what you need. For myself, I like to write things down before I get into session. So I'll just jot it down, even if it's just a couple words. And then if I know I'm going to get emotional because I'm still going to feel a little bit bad, then I can just read it and remember that, I'm doing it for a reason. So
Mhm.
yeah, these were just some little ideas that we had put together. Okay, so let's move on to what to expect sort of in that first session. I know we've already touched on this. I love the Where's Waldo little analogy.
Mhm.
You've spoken about the consent form, the confidentiality. Um, there's, I know through my experience that there's a bit of a review of the intake, and that's probably just that confirming, hey, this is why we're here. These are some of the
Yeah,
things you might want to talk about, but that's okay if it changes too, right?
absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. I think sometimes too, I'm glad you mentioned this point, Michelle, because sometimes people come in and they think, okay, because I only mentioned this thing in the beginning, and now maybe I'm a few sessions in and it's changed. Am
Yeah.
I still allowed to be here? Of course, things
Mhm.
change often. So yes, we'll review things, but there's flexibility to it too.
Yeah. And I was thinking there's a comment here about asking your therapist questions. So I'm curious, like if we're kind of getting to know each other and you're asking me about like what I do in my spare time or what things, I really enjoy, what sort of questions can I ask my therapist while we're in the process of doing that? Or
Yeah,
or more importantly, is that appropriate?
that is such a good question. Such a good question to your question. I think again, every therapist is so different in terms of what they're open to sharing.
Okay.
One thing to note is you can probably expect that most are going to shy away from giving personal details of their life. And it's not necessarily that they don't want you to know those. But I think one of the beautiful things about therapy, and I had a client say this to me once, was no offense, Alex, but I like that I don't know anything about you because it keeps the focus on
Mm,
myself and I don't have to worry about you in your life.
okay.
And I didn't take any offense to that. I thought that was
Okay.
brilliant. Yes, that's why therapy
Okay.
works because you
Okay.
are coming in and we're focusing on your needs. As soon as I might reveal more about myself, then you might be concerned about my grandma's birthday or her health or the
Okay.
neighborhood that I live in. So you're welcome to ask questions that come up, and your therapist will just navigate them with their comfort level and ability with you in session. Some
Okay.
other things that maybe I don't want to say you can't necessarily ask, but one thing that I've had a lot of people run into is they'll say, oh, is my sister seeing you for therapy? Or is my best friend
Mm,
seeing you for therapy? And we actually, to keep things
mm,
confidential and to
mm.
protect you, we're not allowed to let people know that you're with seeing me for therapy. So if your mom
Right.
calls on the phone and is concerned about you, nope, I can't even give a yes or a no. I can't answer the question
Right.
entirely. So just know that if you're going to ask about
Okay.
friends, family, we also can't disclose that information.
Okay.
And for the rest of the session too, in your first session, again, yeah, it's really just to get to know you. It'll feel probably like you're having coffee with a new acquaintance. I'm going to ask
Nice.
you about your family, your friend groups, hobbies, what you do
Okay.
for a living, if you have a pet, just kind of all those questions. It's pretty easy and informal. And then we kind of like to discuss near the end too, like what's the roadmap forward? At least that's my take on things. If you come in
Okay.
with a certain presenting problem, let's say anxiety, that's a pretty general one that a lot of folks come in with. I'll let you know at the end sort of where I think we're going to go from that point, what you might expect in the sessions to come, like to follow, sorry. And we'll also do some goal setting too. You know, what are you hoping to get out of your time with me? And that'll be the wrap up. It goes by, I will say the 50 minutes goes by so quickly. And
Okay.
clients typically say that too.
Well, so as having just taken my executive coaching education, sounds like a very similar process. Alex will sort of outline expectations. We know that things can change, and that really the time is for you, and just like psychologists, executive coaches are bound by ethics. So I think this is an important conversation just for anyone when you're reaching out around therapists to really know and understand. And I think it is really, we should acknowledge the fact that some people don't want other people to know they're going to therapy. And that's totally okay. And if you choose to share that you're seeing a therapist, as we have, we're pretty open about that, that's okay. I guess I'm just curious about sort of that conversation, can we have these conversations at work, or should we be keeping this to ourselves? Like, what are your thoughts around that?
Again, it's as you just said, it's so unique to the person and what they need out of that. But I also think there's something to be said about talking about it more and normalizing it. It goes right back to the title of our conversation today. I think that decreases the stigma, letting people know that, yeah, Michelle, a coach, a mom, a friend, she might also access therapy. Alex, a psychologist herself, goes to therapy. It is so normal. And so if you are open and willing to like just even share with, your close friends and family, I bet that could even be an encourager for them to get the support that they need as well. Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think my thoughts on that are just really ensuring that you're comfortable with it.
Yeah.
And I think where I've gotten to is if I'm choosing to tell someone, I don't want to tell them just because it makes me feel good. I want someone to know what I get out of it, right? What my outcomes are. Most people who have logged into these webinars know I wear my emotions on my sleeve. So do I become emotional therapy? Yeah, absolutely. But what the result is that I'm able to really stop and process my thoughts in a time that I wouldn't normally take for myself. So, if that's important to you and that's something that you might benefit, and one of my friends says she gets something completely different, right? It's her sounding board, it's her safe space. So it is very personal. And, my hope is that out of this webinar, if the one message we could convey is to just try it, right? If it's something you've been thinking about, that this conversation helps you take that first step. And if you don't love the first therapist that you've tried, that's okay. There are so many that are available. But my learning was to not wait until I'm in crisis, because I mean, you can't just walk in. You can walk into the emergency, but you can't just walk into a therapy session, generally speaking, I'll say, right? So those are sort of my, I don't know if I had to call them like summary or wrap up thoughts. And it makes me, I think about that when I look at this image of this person looking in the mirror. It is really so personal, which, you get out of it what you put in. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. And I like what you just added to about not necessarily waiting to crisis. Of course, you can wait until that point too. If you
Of
don't feel
course.
like you need
Yeah.
to go at this point, that's fine. But
Right.
kind of with our webinar, I do think that if you're in a time and space where you're interested to try it, there's some things you might want to work on. You have the opportunity to utilize some of the tips that we've given, you know, taking that time to prepare and make the questions and find the right fit for you versus if you are in crisis and just having to make a choice. So being able to proactively set yourself up for a good fit, a good match, a good experience. Try to do that if you can.
Yep, that's a great point, Alex. Yeah, I didn't want to dissuade anyone from that approach. So that really just covers, I think, sort of the content that we wanted. I love this little guy. He's so cute. And what we would love is your feedback. So opportunities, maybe questions that we didn't answer or questions that you might have. If you want to take those offline, you can reach out to Amanda through cornerstonecounselling.com. Their contact info is there. We're always happy to answer your questions. And the way you can provide us with feedback is through just a Google Docs. So it's completely anonymous. We'd love to know what you thought. What did we miss? What did you love? And I don't know, Alex, do you have any sort of closing thoughts before we turn it over to Amanda?
Just give yourself a pat on the back for listening here. You're obviously thinking about these topics and maybe you're in therapy, you're wanting to start therapy. And yeah, you just deserve all the loving on yourself for taking the steps that you do take on your mental health journey. It's not easy, and I am proud of you, and I know Michelle and Amanda are too.
Alex, I couldn't have said it better. I love the concept of celebrating every step.
Yeah.
Because I know, that first canceled appointment, the one I booked and never, 48 hours before, I was like, I don't think I can go. I didn't celebrate that. And the fact that, like, hey, that's one step. Like, you've really reframed my thought. And it's like, we're all just taking baby steps to make it better. And so that is a great message to celebrate the progress that we're making towards supporting our own mental health. Yeah, kudos. And thank you to you for all of your professional expertise in the industry. These webinars would not take place without that. And obviously, thank you to Amanda, who has been a great partner, as we've mentioned. Amanda, will let you have the last word, as we normally do in these webinars.
Thank you so much to you both for that insightful conversation on therapy. And thank you to everyone for tuning in today. We would now like to share some upcoming events with you. So at Cornerstone, we are offering anger management and marriage preparation workshops in early 2024. And you can find more information on our website. We would also like to mention that our next collaborative webinar is in February, and the topic is positive psychology and how to be an influencer in your workplace. So very interesting discussion there. Again, you can visit our websites to get more information on those. And once again, thank you so much for joining us. We hope you have a better understanding of therapy and accessing professional mental health support. We wish you a happy holiday season and look forward to seeing you in 2024. Take care.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.